Welcome to another exciting episode of the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Jerry. Well, we hope it's exciting. I guess it'll depend on how the conversation goes.
I can almost guarantee it'll be exciting.
That's fair. That's fair.
Because of who our guest is, which you will announce in just a minute.
It's true. But if it isn't exciting, we'll come back and post, and we'll edit and put in another descriptive word there, like
that's true.
Moderately interesting, maybe. It passes the time. It's better than a root canal, something like that.
Better than the dentist podcast, yes.
So whatever ends up in post, there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So just a quick reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, at least for those of us who have employers. Hint, hint, hint. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guest.
Thank you, sir. And I'm excited to introduce our guest today, who is always sitting awkwardly on the screen with us until we introduce him. Everyone's like, who is this person? Well, I'll tell you. This is Chris Dotson, and he is currently the Principal Cloud Security Architect at Intab. And prior to that, he was CTO Enterprise Identity at IBM, as well as CTO Cloud Platform Security at IBM. So you might see a little correlation with Mr. Bell's history there. So he survived IBM, which is good. Not everyone does. Also, he's the author of a really cool book, the O'Reilly book, Practical Cloud Security, now in its second edition, which we should talk about because writing a book is not easy. I've done it, and it's not easy. And so much applause to those who do. Has over 25 years of experience in the IT industry, 18 patents. How many do you have, Jerry? Just checking. How many?
3.
Yeah. Didn't even know that. Wow. Okay. Well, he's still beating you. 18 patents, 11 professional certifications. Current focus areas include cloud infrastructure and security, network infrastructure security, identity and access management, server storage, and most importantly, bad puns. What did I miss, Chris?
Nothing, but as I said when we were talking right before the show, the bad puns part, it just proves that very few people actually read bios, because I have put that in my bio in a lot of different places, and almost nobody has ever actually said anything about it.
We're breaking ground here on the show.
Yeah, I don't understand why that is. That is one of the most important aspects of your bio. But hey, we'll get into that later. So, as Andy alluded to, Chris and I worked together at IBM. Chris was part of the reason that I don't have any hair anymore.
Absolutely.
Chris was in the IBM's cloud business, and he they put food in the hallway, and they kind of lured me down until I became the CISO, and so
chicken nuggets, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. It was chicken nuggets.
And to fact check, immediate fact check though. Sorry, I got to do this, but when I met you some 12, 13, 14 years ago, you were already very, very bald. So
that's true. It was my kids that made me bald. I will say that. But that's just the way it is. So anyway, we've known each other for quite some time. Spent a lot of time working together. Chris is one of the smartest people I know. Great person. So thank you for being here. I did want to talk about your book because it's in the second edition, which is pretty cool. I'd like to just explore a little bit, like what caused you to write that? What was your impetus for that?
So it was interesting. I actually never thought I would write a book, particularly. I didn't really consider myself an author. O'Reilly was actually, I guess, looking for stuff in cloud security. Another friend of mine said, "Hey, O'Reilly's looking around for somebody to write a book in cloud security. You ought to talk to them." And so I went and talked to them. And in fact, you all were there when I talked to the managing editor at one of the Derby cons. But we talked, and she said, here's what you do. You come up with a proposal and so on and so forth. And I thought, gosh, I've just got so much going on. I don't know if I can take this on in addition to everything else. Like, the cloud work was keeping me busy so much. And actually, like, I've got to give credit to my wife because I've said, well, I've got, this, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And she's like, well, you got to do it. Like, there wasn't even a question, right? And I'm like, okay, I guess I got to do it, right? Like, I mean, it's going to mean some sacrifices, right? Like, we're going to have to plan out time, So basically, my weekend mornings, for a year were basically gone for the most part. I took like a vacation or so on, but the reason I wrote it, I mean, largely because it seemed like there's so much information out there, but a lot of times it was just hard to know the right questions to ask. And so as much as anything with the book, it's a fairly thin book, right? Like, as much as anything with the book, it was aimed at people who are either fairly familiar with cloud, but not really security, or fairly familiar with security, but not with cloud, to kind of understand the concepts and know where to go for questions. I mean, you can Google whatever you need as long as you know what to Google. But if you don't even know that a thing exists, that's hard. And I think it was another friend of mine who'd written a book said, like, the best advice is write a book that would have been useful to you 4 years ago or something, or it's X years ago. He didn't say 4. For me, it was about 4, right? Because I was like, wow, yeah, like if I'd known this 4 years ago, it took me a while to wrap my head around this concept. And once I had the concept, like, again, the details usually work themselves out, although sometimes they're very tricky. So yeah, I kind of fell into it like I did with an awful lot of things in my career. You wander around and you see an opportunity, like, that seems like a good idea, and you do it. And I've just been very fortunate to have lots of those types of opportunities. So that's how it happened.
So based on your experience writing the book and your professional experience at IBM and now Intapp, what kinds of common security mistakes or lessons do you would
Yeah. So there's a few things. So one is that I think security professionals need to be broad, right? Because a lot of security professionals get like so deep in a particular area, firewalls or encryption or whatever. And so they see everything through that lens, when in the reality is, like, the threats come from everywhere, as you both well know, right? The attacker is not going to come from like a carefully crafted firewall that I've spent lots and lots of time on. The attacker is going to come out of like just some random place. And you kind of got to cover it all to some extent. It's impossible to cover it all, right? But you got to try to cover it all as much. So I think being broad technically, that's very important. Understanding, I think, the fundamentals of risk management, that's really important. Right. And actually you taught me some of that, or indirectly taught me some of that, because you said, well, there's this book, and I think it's risk management, what's broken and how to fix it, or something along those lines. A little dry. I mean, I won't lie. And I'm not a big nonfiction fan, despite having written a piece of nonfiction, but like in general, I don't want to read them. But I read it, and it was actually fascinating, because people are really, really bad at estimating likelihood. So risk, like likelihood, impact, right? Everybody always agrees on the impact, or almost always. So, man, the likelihood, like, everybody thinks it's either two likely things that are unlikely or very likely, or things that are very likely or unlikely, right? Like, that's where you end up with the mess. And so I think understanding those fundamentals of risk management really helps. So along that line, understanding a little bit about probability helps too, right? And again, this is something you kind of taught me also, and this, not trying to be like, a super fan here, but like, aggregate risk is a thing, right? Like, and I think the one that got me was the one, like, I think it was the Atlanta airport, right? Where they had all this redundant power and everything, but both of the power, the power was coming through the same thing, the same conduit. And so when that conduit flooded, it took out both sets of redundant power. They checked the box on redundant power. But so, like, understanding dependent variables versus independent variables, you don't have to be a math person for that, right? Like, you just need to know, like, what is the same thing going to take out X and Y at the same time? If so, then I've really only got one control, right? I need those independent things. So I think that's an important part of risk management, and which is an important part of being a security person. I also like to say, operate, sometimes you have to avoid wasting your time, right? And so sometimes you have to operate under what I call the principle of already screwed, right? Which is, like, if your threat model is like, well, somebody like compromises the cloud provider and takes over X, Y, and Z, and at that point, like, there's really not a lot you can do about some of those threats. At some point, you have to put the mitigations in you can, you put the controls in you can, you put the detections in. That's an important part. Like, the most important thing there sometimes is like just knowing if things are going bad. And then you, like, once you've got that, then you're kind of free to use other things that depend on that not happening without a lot of additional risk. I mean, you have to be careful on that thing you're deciding to trust, but you want to make sure that you're not trusting like a bazillion different things, and you want to put your trust, I think, in, generally speaking, in fewer really solid things if you can. Great advice, but of course, doing it in practice is hard. Well, what else? I mean, I think getting a little bit of experience as a red teamer helps, even if it's not your main thing you do, because like, again, it expands that what is possible. I remember I was going through one of those online hack the box or something like that, and it's like, now let's try a blind SQL injection attack. Like, you can't see any output from the database, but let's see what happens, right? And man, like, that opened my eyes. Like, I need to evaluate the impact of blind SQL attacks is higher than I would have thought it was, because I saw that I was able to completely compromise that little fake environment, right? Easy fake environment. But I was able to completely compromise that using a blind SQL attack. So I think that's good too. I guess that's a lot of, general
So
stuff.
good stuff. What do you see commonly being done wrong that leads to problems?
Land. So
You can answer this with Jerry's entire tenure at IBM if you'd like.
But-
Working for Jerry, yes.
Yeah.
gotta admit, I was really like, kind of hoping to be like close up and like right in front of a your mom joke. Like that's like watching the space shuttle take off, right? Like
It's
something close and personal with the your mom joke. That that would be that would be amazing, Andy. I hope that happens sometime. So
well, coincidentally, I was up close and personal with his mom last night.
thank you.
You're welcome. Maybe another one will sneak its way in.
We'll see if we'll even want to hear this episode.
Goodness.
So what is done wrong aside from your mom? Yeah. Uh, what is done wrong? Identity and access management, obviously a big thing. Now that was a big focus of mine. So like you tend to view things through the focus of what you were like, dealing with most, but it really is a big thing. Like people, like what is it? Verizon DBIR is something like saying something like, or maybe I'm misattributing this because I often do, but the attackers aren't hacking in, they're logging in. That's not entirely true. Like app vulnerabilities are and unpatched vulnerabilities are still a big part of it, but not maintaining your access control is a big, huge problem. Not keeping up with patches and prioritizing those, right? I mean, everybody knows that stuff too. But I think in a large part, it's like, in a more meta sense, it's being either like too alarmist or not alarmist enough. And I've been on both sides of that plenty of times, right? I'm certainly not maybe any more than intermediate level on that, but it is really hard to know what to freak out about and what not to freak out about. And, you want to err on the side of caution a little bit, but not so much that you're constantly freaking out, because then nobody listens to you.
Mhm.
So I think I see that done a lot too. People will say, oh my gosh, we've got X vulnerability and so on. Well, yeah, you should have patched it, right? No, you shouldn't just, what is it you said? You shouldn't just build a pipeline from your vulnerability detection system straight into your risk acceptance process. Like, you do need to actually patch a lot of it, but there are some things that aren't as big of a deal, and you should let them be lower priority, and you work on the more important things. So you can't, prioritization is super important. I think I see misprioritization an awful lot.
So if we dig into IAM a bit, what sorts of challenges do you see? I know that we had, for example, we've talked about this on a couple of these now, the big Capital One breach a couple of years ago, which was a kind of a really complicated IAM issue.
Yeah. So that one is textbook, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons. And even though it's a fairly old one, I use that a lot when I'm talking to people about what can go wrong. And so, I mean, you both know, but just like for the benefit of people listening, essentially what happened was attacker fools the web application firewall into retrieving something it shouldn't. And in that case, it was a VM credential, an identity document in AWS terms. Retrieves the identity document, then proceeds to use that same identity document, which is an X509 cert, to go get a token and go access all the stuff out of the buckets, and then just pull the stuff out. And there's so many things that went wrong there, right? So one is you've got the WAF problem, but then you've got the non-human identity not being properly managed. And so, by the way, to answer your question, I think one of the big things right now is non-human identities, right? Like, I think we still have a problem with humans being impersonated.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize I'm interrupting myself, so I apologize. But we have a problem with human identity still to some degree, to a large degree even, with password spraying and credential stuffing and all those types of things. But people are starting at least to get the memo about multi-factor. Sometimes they're still using SMS as two-factor, which I think is a terrible disgrace. It's still better than nothing. But the non-human identities aren't really well managed either. And this is where a lot of people think like, secrets management is the solution there. And I'm not sure I agree, by the way, but like you've got to manage those identities. So the first problem is they got the identity. Then the second problem is they were able to use that identity because the WAF, for whatever reason, had access to every S3 bucket. And this is easy to armchair quarterback. Like, I'm sure the people who set this up were smart people that were motivated to do the right things and so on. Like, I have sympathy for them, but like that had all that. And then the stuff that was in there that was super sensitive was just using like the sort of the standard encryption. So you could have put an extra layer on the really complicated or the really important stuff, like encrypting it in the app or something else. But it wasn't. It was just open. Those were open to the world, like they didn't need to be at that time. They should have been constrained to where only at least the attacker would have to like go break into the network. I mean, it's not much, but it's something, gives you a chance to detect them. And then there's no logging or monitoring. Like all of that data starts flowing out, and nobody's like, why the hell 30 gigs just fly by, right? Like, none of that was there. And so it's an example of like 5 or 6 different controls, any of which could have made this either prevented it or made it considerably better. So it's a perfect example of it. So yeah, I love that one. And I think that illustrates like both your non-human identity problem and lots of other problems in there.
So when we're talking about non-human identities, are you assuming that's what's really behind the rise in UFO sightings these days, or is that unrelated to
right there, right?
No, in all seriousness.
And it shows up on the camera, but I like my access when I 3D printed a little thing that makes it look like a UFO. So
nice.
Yeah. So no, in all seriousness, I think they're calling them something other than UFOs now. It's like
UAPs.
Thank you. Yes. I should have known that you know that.
But I'm old school. I want to believe, so I still call them UFOs. But like we're talking about like service accounts and such, like machine to machine accounts, some sort of like API to API sort of call is what I think you're mainly talking about, right?
Right. So all those system to system communications or service to service or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Like, so I know you're kind of a fan of secrets management, and I think secrets management is not really the right, like it's important to do right now. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't think it's the right way forward, right? I think the right way forward is things like managed identities. So Azure calls them managed identities, and AWS calls them identity docs, and then there's a standard for these things, Spire or Spiffy, right? And then there's a reference implementation of that for Spire, and Uber's using that like at scale. Like you can look at their YouTube, or at least they were a couple of years ago. I saw their YouTube on like they've got, they're handing out all these millions of identities. So like everything that comes up, whether it's a process on a machine or a container or a VM, is endowed by its creator with an identity. And that identity can be then used for authentication and authorization purposes. It totally gets rid of the need for all this secrets management, this mucking around with secrets management stuff. And I think that's clearly the future to me. The problem is just getting there. Like not everybody's, understands conceptually yet. And then like it takes time for the architectures to move through and all this. But I really think that's the future of this. I think secrets management is a stopgap.
Well, we suck at it as an industry. That's for sure.
We absolutely
We're
do.
terrible at it. Yeah.
And if you're losing the game, change the game, right? Like that's the James T. Kirk model.
That's true. I think typically when I'm talking about secrets management, I haven't honestly looked into that, and I'm very curious now. And it's more just, I'm always seeing really loose management and really sort of convenience over security when we're working with secrets, and just whether it's developers or whether it's infrastructure folks or whatever, just like not thinking about the way that you're storing that identity and how quickly it be captured, reused, abused, etc. Much less if you need to rotate it, how are you going to rotate it? So it feels like we have this sort of system of identities that are not well understood in terms of a life cycle. And they're just thrown together with duct tape and spit until it works. And then people like us come along going, wait a second, that's not great. And now we've got problems. And you just committed that secret to a public piece of code. So now everybody has to change your stuff. What do you mean you can't rotate your secret? So that's the stuff that just drives me crazy. And I see it over and over and over again. So clearly something has to change. I agree.
Yeah. And I think that this is the way to make it a change, right? Like you just, whatever you are, when you get created, you get an identity. Spiffy is basically just a standard that allows those things to interoperate so that in theory, and I think this works in practice, like a container in Azure can talk to a database over in AWS and make it work. Although in a lot of cases, I think right now the databases don't understand it natively. So they have to have like a little proxy in front that understands that and then allows it through, which maybe, has its own set of vulnerabilities potentially and so on. But so like, I'm not trying to claim that this is all perfect yet, although there are people using it at scale. I'm just saying, like, to me, that seems like the right way forward. Another thing, by the way, and maybe you all know, like a counterexample is I do not understand why I can't say, you know what? All right, A is talking to B. A, here's an API key. I want you to immediately go talk to B and change that to something that I don't know, and then keep changing it every 30 days. Why the hell do I need to know it because I had to paste it in there? Like, I don't understand that. That seems like a very simple thing to do.
Well,
and as far as
we do that. We do that with privileged identity management or privileged access management tools today, where they have a shim that you get a temporary cred and it changes immediately after you use it. So with interactive human logins, we've got that going. I think part of the challenge that people run into, and I don't know, but I agree with your point, that's a great idea, is when you lose the interactivity of a human-derived login, everything just to work transparently in the background. I think people are very gun-shy of screwing with that. Because if they get locked out, they locked out, and they don't know why. And like, but I'm very open to better ways of doing it. I have no idea why I'm the one ranting on this topic, but yeah.
Yeah, but most of the time it's like app talking to database, right? And so you go and you jump the credential at the database, and then you copy and paste it over to the app. And if you know what, if app loses it or something happens, you just go create another one, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is another important point: is like thou shalt not share identities across things that really where you really shouldn't, right? Like you don't want to end up in a situation where I've got 13 different apps and they've all got to coordinate to change to new secrets. That's dumb. Like these things aren't expensive. Give a different one to every one of the stupid things so that you can maintain the life cycle separately, and you don't have it. The limits the blast radius, the impact if something does happen. So yeah, I think I agree with you. Secrets management's totally screwed up. I just don't know that and I've implemented vaults and by like HashiCorp Vault, good, good thing. There's plenty of other good ones too. And I like, Azure Key Vault and AWS Secrets Manager, I think it's called, or whatever. Like those are all good things. I'm not saying stop using those or keep doing like the copy and paste thing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying like longer term, we want to set up the system to where what we're saying is pods with this particular tag from this particular cluster are allowed to access X. And that's, you just set that rule and you don't worry about like how that happens, particularly because the pod gets the identity, it gets signed, the destination thing trusts that identity, lets you in. This is something that should have been abstracted away from our worries a while back, I think. And I just don't know why it's taken so long, speaking as someone who has done no work whatsoever in making this happen.
Well, I mean, that's our job now as podcasters. We just sit here and just whine about other people not doing it right.
Just throw rocks. Yeah, we just sit here and throw rocks. It sounds a lot like tangential. It's not completely equivalent, but what you just described reminds me a lot of the whole LangSec movement, right? Where you're more kind of describing the outcome, and you have systems that enforce that without having to understand the innards. I think that this is an example of something that I think we, like writ large, struggle with, which is that passwords, for better or for worse, are like the least common denominator. Like we struggle with that across everything. And so you got some old ass shit sitting in the corner that needs to talk to something new. The only common denominator you have are static credentials. And I think that's, it's gonna take some time to get past that. So even after we come up with what you just described as the new nirvana, like that's gotta kind of flow through the system, and that could take a very long time, but it's a great idea.
Yeah, it always takes a long time for stuff to come from like research to fraud. Although those timeframes over history, if you look at them, have like collapsed significantly. I heard a story, by the way, and this is completely tangential, so stop me if you don't want to hear it, but I'm already started now. So if a story that like there's this mathematician, I don't remember who it was, and like just browsing through the market in the 1800s or something, sees oranges stacked up, right? And the oranges are stacked up in a pyramid, like at the market or something. He's like, huh, that's pretty cool. And I wonder if there's any better way to stack it. And so he goes back, and he's a mathematician. So for fun, I guess, he proves that no, in fact, that is the optimal bin packing mechanism in 3 dimensions. And so like that sits around as a proof that nobody really cares about because it's about grocery store oranges for like 100 years. By the way, this story, I've heard this, it could be completely false, that's to be clear, but it's a good story even if it is. And so it sits around for like 100 years. And then like in the days of modems, like, you got 300 baud and 1200 baud and 300 and so, and you get up to the point where they're like doing the encoding, this, I think it's trellis encoding or something in like a 12-dimensional space or something. And when it comes down to is a bin packing algorithm, because you're sending error correction stuff and you get those little balls with the actual signal, and then the ball around it is the error that it can correct into being the actual signal. So you do all that and it's a bin packing thing. And they're like, well, like there's this proof from like, we've got this, is there any better way? And they look at this proof and they're like, no, this is the best way to do it. Like it's mathematically proven. This is the optimal bin packing algorithm. So like your DSL modems and other modems, I think, are basically using multiple channels, and people that with actual signals experience that are not, can correct me because I'm probably, again, may have this wrong, but like each of this day, it's using those same sort of bin packing algorithms because it's provably optimal. So like some mathematician in the 1800s coming up with like, something that is now used in a lot of our communications channels. I think that's just fascinating.
That is cool. It reminds me of, this is very old school. I don't know do you ever remember the TV show Connections, or The Day the Universe Changed by James Burke?
No,
Yes.
I don't think I saw that one. You see?
Yeah. So this was back in like the 80s. And it's this sort of concept, which is really cool, where he traces these earlier scientific advancements that seem very unrelated, but lead incrementally to something else in ways that you never would have expected. And he's a really interesting, like, this is very old school now. I mean, believe me, it's like, it's early 80s, but it's still very relevant and valid, where you can see how something like, one example that we know a lot about is like the printing press, leading into weaving, leading into punch cards for how you programmed a weaving loom, which led into early computer programming, right? That's one example that comes to mind. But there's other ones like how a perfume bottle led to jet engines based on the way that they could spray, the aerosolization and that sort of stuff. There's all sorts of really cool things like that. Based on this story, you might really dig them. And I always thought like the way he told these stories was so amazingly interesting, how you trace all these different, very, very independent scientific evolutions, and how somebody could take these 5 different little pieces that were all very, very distinct and very separate, bring them together to create something net new that never could have happened without all these 5 other little things in all these other areas that came together. So anyway, just a little pitch for him. And
that was a good show. I do remember that. That was a very good show.
I will have to check it out. I've not even heard of it, I don't think. So that's awesome. I will definitely look it up.
So it's a long time ago.
He wrote some books on it too. Yeah. Anyway, back to you, Jerry.
So what about like passkeys? I mean, I obviously that's a different context, but and I would say it's kind of an emerging thing.
Yeah. So I am a big passkey advocate, as you might know, and so I've been very much pushing getting passkeys out. And what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people just think of it as, I've got my username and I've got my password. That's how I get in. And now maybe I've got a username and a password and a couple of different types of second factors. But in reality, like all those things are just authentication methods, right? Like a password is one, or a PIN is one, which is like a password but linked to a specific device. So it's quite a bit different and can be shorter for that reason. A certificate is one. All these different things are authentication methods. You can use any of them. You can switch to you can have a passwordless method like passkeys available without getting rid of your password. Like you can use this one or you can use that one. And a lot of people don't understand that. And then a lot of people don't understand like why passwordless can be secure. But a passkey is basically just a certificate. It's just like an X509 certificate that's generated, but it's a different one generated for every site. And so it's impossible. You're not giving a credential when you do it, right? You're completing a challenge, and only you or your agent in the the browser, only you and the site you actually signed up for can complete that challenge together. So if somebody creates this wonderful evil phishing site that looks exactly like it and is designed to like capture your password and your second factor and then immediately log in, to the real thing on the back end and then like play man in the middle, but has your session keys and can go and do all the stuff you can do at that point, none of that can work with passkeys, right? Because they can't complete the challenge. And if they're in the middle of the challenge, they don't get the thing they need to be in it. There's probably a lot better technical explanations, but that's why I think passkeys are so cool. And passkeys can be YubiKey, which is what a lot of people think of, but it also just be like any place you can create a certificate. So now like on your iPhones or iPads, like they create one and throw it into iCloud. So it's available on all your devices, on your Macs or whatever. In Windows, you can actually store the private key in your TPM chip. So it's like device resident. If you've got that physical machine and the PIN to unlock that store, then you can authenticate. And it doesn't have to be an either or thing. You can still have a password and you can have a passkey, and it kind of frees you to set the password to be something like really hard and gibberish because you're almost never going to need it, sort of as a backup, as a training wheels type of thing to get to passkeys. Now, like when I just delete the password, right? Like there's lots of ways you can get into something, and a lot of times I'm happy enough to just get rid of the password altogether if you can. Most things don't even offer that yet, though. So yeah, I think passkeys are what everybody's just going to think of it as like, oh, it's just Face ID or whatever. But what's really happening there is it's a nice face on security or on certificates. And I think that's what everybody ought to switch to, and is slowly switching to. And it's been like, God, passwords have been around for like 70 years. Like it's going to take a little while, to get that change made, but it's really worth it. And so I definitely highly recommend it. Any place you see where you can get a passkey, just do it. CVS is doing it now. Fidelity, lots of other places. Target, I think. Like I went to Target and I registered a passkey and then just signed in with the passkey a while later. So it's more popular than you think. Google's doing it, I think, now by default.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's big advocate as well. I think what I worry about is the average non-technical consumer may find it intimidating or not know what it is and shy away. And like I said, passwords have been around for 70 years. It's sort of like we've kind of taught society what a password is, and everybody kind of gets that, even if they do it poorly. I think it's going to take maybe a generation or two to get passkeys to that level of acceptance, unfortunately. For the average like consumer grade, hey, I'm logging into my bank site sort of thing for the non-technical people. But it's still an improvement, moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. I mean, some of these things take generational type change or at least a while for people to get used to them. But if we don't talk about them and evangelize a little bit about them, I don't think know that it happens, right? Because a lot of people don't really see the risk there. Like if something bad happens, they're sad about it, certainly. But they don't see the sort of the association between bad passwords and like getting hacked. It's not their day job and they just don't think about it all the time. It's not like that they're just like not paying attention or anything. It's just like it's background noise, right? Like this is just something I use and I don't want to have to like worry or spend a bunch of time thinking about it. That's completely understandable. I'm that way about a lot of things. Like I get in my car, I don't think too awfully much about what's happening under the hood, although a little bit because it breaks sometimes.
It's like that scene in Big Bang Theory where they're all hanging out and the car's broken and like, who knows about internal combustion engines? And they all raise their hands, like they all understand the theory and the physics behind an internal combustion engine. Who could fix it? Nobody. Anyway,
So
Jerry.
So
Sorry.
I know one password. I'm a prolific 1Password user, and they've actually made the user experience for passkeys super easy. Like when you go and sign up for something, it just prompts you, and you just click a button, and now you have your key, and you go to log back in. It asks you if you want to use your passkey to log in, and like it's I would say even easier than a password, the way they've implemented it. And one of the things I did want to mention is we are seeing, and we've talked about this on the other podcast, and I've actually seen it in real life with some organizations I'm involved in, the concept of intercepting the time-based one-time passwords, right? That is actually happening now. Like we've talked about in the past about how, SMS is a bad idea because, taking over phone numbers is somewhat simple to do these days. But like for a long time, I think we've had this kind of trust in the top P type scheme, and now we're seeing that being broken. I think, I don't want to say at scale, but like they're being very successful at it. The bad guys are being really successful at it.
I have personally seen it as well. I mean, it's not that hard technically, right? You get the proxy site, you collect the credentials, you use them within 60, like the automation can use them within 60 seconds to sign in. Not super hard, right? So yeah, I agree with you. I think, the marketing term is the phishing resistant credentials. Only way to go for this, this new world where the attackers are very well skilled and well funded. Like it's, I won't say legitimate, but it's obviously a real career path for people to go into hacking these things and work for organized crime and make a lot of money. And that's what really changed, I guess, over the last 20-ish years, is instead of mostly hobby state, some nation state, but then a lot of hobbyists, attackers now, like these folks want to make money, right? And they're very good at it. What was it? You said like the industrialization on one of the things, like the industrialization of this process, right? And that's exactly what's happening. Like they go in, they get the creds, then they host them and they auction them off to the highest bidder. And then that bidder takes some malware as a service and then leverages that to attack you. And then the malware as a service gets their cut, and the initial attacker who specializes in getting the credentials gets their money. And like, it's better organized than a lot of companies I work for sure.
Yes.
And these are criminals,
Right.
Jerks.
But they're highly motivated, and money is a good motivator.
It certainly is. So yeah, I think that the way people need to think about authentication absolutely needs to change, and passkeys, I think, are the best way to do that. And you're right, the experience is great. 1Password, it is cross-platform, which is nice. So like when I've got my passkey on, and I use it on my workstation, on my Windows workstation, I use it on a Mac, I use it on my iPhone, on an Android device, it works everywhere. I think longer term, I'm afraid that the 1Passwords and LastPasses of the world will get edged out by the operating system manufacturers building that stuff in, which has happened so many times over history, from browsers to actually IP stacks. People must remember Trumpet Winsock, right? Like all those things were originally extra add-on things, and then they got built into the operating system. And it seems like the password wallet functionality is right for doing that too. So we'll see.
Maybe, but you bring up a good point about the cross-platform, cross-device, cross-vendor need to sync that stuff.
So the FIDO Alliance just put out something about the standard for exporting and importing the passkeys, which has its own set of attack vectors, right? Then there's a place where you can steal those from if they've been exported. But for general users, that's not bad, right? Like you take it, you do it, and then it deletes the file or something. Probably pretty minimal risk. A lot of organizations, they want like unclonable passkeys. Like
they still need to get physical access to the device, which is
So, but it's hard to get it out even if you have really hard to get it out even if you have physical access. I mean, I personally did not spend a minute worrying about that particular one where the YubiKeys could be cracked. But there also is some benefit in the fact that they're unclonable. Like I literally cannot share this with somebody else without giving away my access. Right. So that helps with certain behavioral issues with people sharing credentials, right? Because you just can't do it.
Well, I think we're really talking about three different things here. We're talking about the average user doing their average everyday stuff in their average life. Then we're talking about corporate user accounts for humans. And then we're also talking about non-human UFO driver account. I mean, non-human service accounts, right? And they're sort of like three different classes of problems with three different solutions. Like in a corporate environment, I'm at the end, like SSO all day, every day. Like just go find a good SSO provider and just make that go in a corporate world. Like for your users is kind of where I'm at. It's my default easy button. But they're all different problem sets, right? And with generic users, and I know I'm just sort of ranting here, if it's too difficult, they're not going to do it. Like if my bank forced you to use a passkey on a YubiKey, they would probably lose half their customers. And they know that. So they won't do it, right? It's an interesting problem.
I think Yubico eventually may have a problem too, though, right? Because it's very clear to me that whatever electronic magic you have in here can also be in here.
Sure.
Like there's absolutely no reason that the phone can't be whatever phone model you like, can't have the same protections and such as a YubiKey. they sell these things for like what, $40 or something, or $30 or 40 or 50, somewhere in there. Like the phones cost so much that having a version with that built in for an extra 30 or $40 would not make a lot of people bat an eye. And then just like power windows on cars, eventually it's standard, right? Like it's a luxury to start with and it's standard later. So yeah, I think we've underestimated in the past how much of a personal computer and the all-in-one device this happens, and I don't think that's necessarily going to stop. I think it's going to it's pretty clearly turning into your main identity. And while on that, like, why in the heck can't the federal government like give me a public key in addition to my social security number, which is widely known by every hacker everywhere, right? Just having a list of, a set of public keys would like actually make several things. There's privacy concerns, obviously, but like when I actually want to prove who I am to the bank or something, that would be super useful, right? Like if they just sent me a smart card and I could like, I don't know, like that seems right.
Wasn't there a proposal for a while that the U.S. Post Office was going to do something along those lines? I thought it never got off the ground, but I vaguely recall that. I could be wrong, but
that's when they were worried about what they were going to do. Because email was taking over, right? And then people didn't realize Amazon was coming. So there you go.
Well, and I mean, I have a whole rant on social security numbers. Like if we could just change them when they get leaked, maybe we could stop some of the problem. But nope, that technology doesn't exist. Sorry.
No. I mean, in general, it seems like the only right answer is just to not trust a social security number as being a secret anymore, right? Which I think seems to be the way everything's going. But there's no good replacement, right? If we had public keys, like, some government assigned like public-private key pairs, that would be useful.
But a huge amount of the population would just shy away because it's government issued.
Yeah,
right?
But they don't have to use it. Like, you see old stuff too, right? Like,
yeah, sure.
Now, like we're talking about an overnight, type of thing. Just like add it as an option. Let the new, like the early adopters, like the same adoption curve that always happens, right? Get the early adopters and the late early adopters and all those folks on, and eventually that's how change happens.
Well, wasn't it included in the COVID vaccine anyway, I thought?
I did not see it come.
Anyway, now that I've derailed that entirely.
Oh my goodness. So to change subjects a little bit.
Please.
You and I spend a lot of time talking about the shared responsibility matrix for cloud.
Yep.
With customers.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but no.
No idea. And, recently one of the things that's been talked about quite a bit is this shared fate model. And I wanted to see if you have any, if you had any perspective on that.
Yeah, I haven't heard it called that actually, but I have often said, like when talking to clients or something, like, look, our fates are intertwined, right? Like in fact, when you're in that type of relationship of the client and the provider, you generally want the provider to have more to lose than you do. And I think in most cases, the cloud providers do have that. Like if they mess up and leak your data, it's going to be bad for you, but it may kill them, right? Because their entire business model depends upon people trusting them with their data, trusting the cloud provider with their data. And that's why cloud providers take, I mean, I don't need to tell you, but that's why cloud providers take security so seriously, because you might survive one of those things, you're unlikely to survive two or three type of thing. It's bad enough when, we see what happens to other security providers when they mess up and they take a hit temporarily. And then sometimes it's a more permanent thing. I don't know if LastPass, for example, is still recovered from the issues from a few years ago in terms of market share. Like I think that certainly they had a large chunk of the market and they've lost at least some of it, I think. I don't know what their market shares are. But yeah, so if that's what you mean by the shared fate model, I actually think that maybe is the wrong way to look at it. I think you want a relationship where the provider has more to lose than you do. Like they're not just sharing in your fate, they're exceeding it. Right. And I think that's generally like the natural order of things.
Well, I think it goes beyond, I mean, obviously, that's an important thing, but I think it goes, for a long time. And I think cloud providers are finally getting on the bandwagon, but like multi-factor authentication was optional, right?
Yes.
It wasn't mandated. And so, because cloud providers, they were giving you, the customer, enough rope to hang yourself, basically. And then something bad would happen, and then the cloud provider would say, "Whoa, like we didn't do anything wrong. It's all you.
Or Snowflake for a
Snowflake.
major SaaS vendor. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what you were referring to then. So I went
Yeah.
completely in the wrong direction to start.
Well, I mean, I think it's all part of the same, you know.
Yeah. So I do think that is important, and that is, something that, like, when you're talking to clients, like, no, we need you to do these things because if something bad happens, it'll be your name and our name in the
Mhm.
papers, right? And so, yeah, in that sense, we do share that fate, and I think that that's very important, and I think that can help overcome. Sometimes there's organizational resistance to putting on security measures that may increase the friction slightly or something. So from conversions or for customer experience or things like that. And I think that does help because it's very, very true, right? And the best convincing arguments are true, obviously. And so I think it is very,
Please.
yes. Yeah, I found the truth to be a wonderful weapon. So it definitely helps convince those in the organization who may be worried about such things when you can point to examples like that and say, look, like it is in our best interest to force our customers sometimes to move along the curve just a little bit, depending on what business you're in and so on. But obviously, like Snowflake's wishes at this point that they'd done that. Because as far as I can tell, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't followed the story super closely. As far as I can tell, that is the main thing they did wrong, was they let their customers not secure their accounts well enough. Is that right?
Basically. I mean, they had a lot
Roughly
of folks
speaking,
with single factor passwords that got caught up. They believe in other password dumps from other breaches, and passwords are being reused. And the bad guys went and tried it on Snowflake, and sure enough, the same username password got them in. That's the theory, at least as best we know, and they're off to the races.
yeah, and then I think,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, then I think it was exacerbated by media going to Snowflake and saying, what the heck, guys? And Snowflake said, we weren't hacked. It was all our customers' problem.
Yeah, blame the customer rarely works out well. I know how you like attribution, Andrew. So, like, who
Absolutely.
do you think it was? Do you think it was the Martians in this case or the Venetians?
It was,
I think
so as it
Jerry's
turns
trying to line up his post IBM career as a cyber criminal, is what I
That's
think.
right. So it turns out, apparently, it's a Canadian. I think
That's true.
Nobody
they
expected that.
No, it was
you never. I mean, they're so polite up there. I'm sure he apologized
Yes.
as he was
Speaking of-
stealing the data.
I did.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
sorry, eh?
Hey, got all your data. Eh? My apologies to any of the Canadians listening because.
But yeah,
Sorry,
so
nobody watches the show. It's okay. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
they did. They did arrest somebody, and I think he was part of a larger crime group. But yeah, it's interesting. We saw something a little bit similar with Microsoft's breach. Definitely different, but they obviously had the big Office 365 breach a while ago, and one of the challenges a lot of the impacted parties had was like, were we harmed in this? And Microsoft basically said, I don't know, maybe you should check your logs. And by the way, I hope you've subscribed to E5.
I hope you paid for the extra logs. Yeah, that wasn't a good look either. And there's been a lot of talk, I think, about like the premium for security stuff. And to some extent, I'm a little defensive about that because I actually think that in a lot of cases, those things cost the provider more. And so it makes some sense. If the cost goes up, the cost goes up, right? Like the charge goes up. So I think it's a little unfair for people to expect like everything for free. But on the other hand, we probably do need to rethink what's sort of table stakes. And the market is taking care of that, voting with their wallets and complaining and so on. So like, I don't know that I personally need to do anything about it. But it's an interesting question as to how reasonable is it for you to charge for what types of extra security things should you charge for, and for what types of things should you just consider like in order to have a fit for purpose product should you give people, and like we've seen that move. So
I had an opportunity to I wouldn't say it was testifying, but I had an opportunity to meet with the CSRB that was put together in response to the Azure incident, and that was one of the messages I had was like, it isn't free, right? It's it is something that you have to pay for. Especially when you're talking about something like logs. It's easy to say, well, like, you should make all these logs available, and okay, fine, but like that has a cost associated with it, and it's not necessarily insignificant, especially if, for larger customers. And so, like, maybe you need to be able to make it available, and it's a consumption-based service. But I think it's a good point. Like, you have to walk the line, between making something available for not, a ridiculous amount of money to protect themselves, and um, and being able to drive forward innovation. But, like, obviously, if you're not, you're not charging money for your enough money for your cloud services, like, you're going to stagnate and you're going to fall behind, and you're going to get overtaken. So I think it's a tough situation, but certainly I think from a customer's perspective, there's an expectation that, like, your provider is enabling you to operate securely, and perhaps, like, telling you when you've done something wrong.
Yeah, and I think like most things, there's a bad car analogy in there, right? Like it used to be certain safety features used to be somewhat premium on cars, and then over time they become included in more safety features, become premium on cars, and so on. And I think we see the same things happening in SaaS services.
Mhm.
The other bad car analogy, which I and probably lots of other people use, is like it's not only important to buy a pass or SaaS or IS, but you also have to drive it responsibly. You can take a very safe car,
Mhm.
drive it into a tree, and like you're in bad shape, right? And so, as much as possible, if we're cloud providers, we need to try and make sure that we ensure our clients do that. To your point about shared fate, but it also, like, some part of that responsibility does ultimately rest with the client, and there's not a lot we can only do so much there.
Do you guys see a day coming where some of these big cloud providers might do basic vulnerability or configuration scans against their own customers just as a self-protection mechanism for just PR and stability reasons?
I do. I mean, I think, like, I see a little bit of this with like Azure with Defender for Cloud and stuff, because they give you a certain
Hmm.
those things for free, and they kind
Yeah.
of nag you about, like, you've got these problems and so on. And I think some of that is obviously just like that's a feature that appeals to people, and so they're trying to sell cloud services, right? But I think at least some of that might be partly motivated by this shared fate type of concept. So yeah, like I would certainly try that, right? If I'm one of the big cloud providers and have the option to kind of prod customers into doing more secure things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I had more than my fair share of conversations when I was in that role, and I think you did too, with customers who managed their workloads badly and they got ransomwared, or they lost their data, and then they come to you, with the sad Pikachu face and say, well, like, what did you do? And you have to point out, like, there's certain things we're responsible for and certain things you're responsible for, and like, you didn't do it. But I think that over time it becomes kind of an attractive nuisance. Like, when you have customers on a public cloud that are acting badly, and I think you have to counterbalance that not only with the cost of like the vulnerability scanning, but I also think, and this was something that I wrestled with, like, is that you have to consider the peril that you put yourself into if you're accepting responsibility for, like, assessing the security of your customers' workloads. Because if you miss something, if you don't do something enough, and then they have a problem, that discussion that I just described gets a lot harder, because now they're going to say, well, like, we were counting on you. We were counting on you to tell us that we had this, out of date WordPress plugin, or what have you, and you didn't, and we got hacked and whatnot. So I think that's that's kind of thing that providers have to navigate. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to get there somehow, some way, eventually, because it's becoming too much of a problem not to.
Yeah. And I wonder how much the insurance will play into this, because I've always sort of thought that like cyber insurance was like an odd way to try and handle things. But if you think about the other places insurance is done, like they enforce certain, you have to have X, Y, and Z for us to insure you, and this gives you a discount and that gives you that on. And I think you all have more experience with this than I have, because I haven't directly negotiated one of those. I've just been sort of on the sidelines, throwing a few pot shots in. But like, do you think cyber insurance is going to drive the right behavior in some cases among, for clients, where like that takes some of the load off the cloud providers to make the insurance
Somewhat.
guys?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen where insurance companies will ask you for and be very prescriptive about very specific defenses and very specific controls, which will decrease your premiums. But in general, the cost of those controls far exceed the premium decrease, and they don't know how well you're running those. Like, let's say they want you to have XDR deployed. Great. You could say, yeah, I got XDR. They don't know if you're running it well. And usually the cost of the XDR far exceeds whatever you're going to save in cyber insurance. But yeah, I do see that from the cyber insurance company saying, here's what we see lowers claims, especially around ransomware.
Yep. No, I think that would be good, because like, let's make the insurance companies the bad guys. Nobody likes them. Now I've insulted Canadian and insurance companies, and I guess if there's any Canadian insurance companies, it'll really be.
So soon enough, you'll need to have, how you can plug into your car, like how well you're driving for your car insurance company. You'll need to plug your cyber insurance company right into all your vulnerability management controls, and they get a live feed of every one of your audits every day.
You are good at the apocalyptic horror, dystopian future thing.
The horror persists, yet so do I. So that's why Jerry has me on the show. Your mom jokes and absolute mind-numbing horror is why I'm here.
So I feel like we've I think we reached terminal altitude, and like we're going back down. So I think I'm gonna call it and say this was awesome, and thank you very much, Chris. I think we'd love to have you back. This was
come back.
Really great discussion.
Especially because Jerry forgot to.
Hey, look at that!
Yeah, we're breaking news. We're working on one for this show. So once we get them out, we'll get them to you. But the sad part is Jerry forgot to press record. So this whole thing was lost.
I see the little red line. I know you're lying.
We'll get to do it all again.
But this was great. If people wanted to find out more about you or follow you, what's their best options?
I am not cool like you guys. So I'm just basically on LinkedIn. I don't really post much. I mainly work and then occasionally throw sarcastic comments, or again, if I have an option, bad puns in. So probably LinkedIn, CR Dotson would be the closest thing I have to that. I am on Jerry's Mastodon instance, have been for, I was like one of the first 100 users or something, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
He told me about this cool new thing. So I'm on there, CR Dotson, I think, as well. And that's one of those places. If you want to say hi, please feel free.
Awesome. Well, we'll post a link to your LinkedIn and your Mastodon account.
Thank you.
So, thank you again. This was great, and thank you to everybody for listening. If you like the show, give us some review love, and if you don't like the show, you can still, like, it's not illegal to give us a good review, right? Like you can give us a good review and then unsubscribe. Like that's acceptable.
It won't even
cost you
insurance premiums to go up or anything, will it?
Right.
That's true. But what you don't know is Jerry has a praise kink, and he's trying to get it, reinforced.
Damn it.
And you know what? Hey, who am I to dissuade that? Make Jerry happy.
Right.
Anyway.
That's right.
We've got, where's this? This is going to be on all the major podcast feeds. And if you know of one that isn't, let us know. We have a YouTube channel, so you can see a video version, you can see an audio version. Any way you want to consume this, we probably have a good option for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually going to even be playing in certain UAPs. So it's just awesome.
I agree.
Anyway,
we should go. We should go.
Yeah.
This is getting bad.
Hit me up, Scotty.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Take
Chris.
care.
Bye-bye.